we'll kick off officially with Ryan coming.
Okay.
But I guess right before he comes, in terms of the cadence and how, and I'm open to feedback on this, to structure the meeting, I think kicking off and discussing the new business first, and then giving the community a chance to speak, and not necessarily honoring all of the old business in that order, but I'm sure some of the old business will be covered by folks on the line. And then we can work through what's remaining of the old business once everyone on the phone's been given a chance to speak about their particular issue. Does that sound okay by everyone?
Yeah.
That
Yes.
way we maximize folks' time on the line, because we appreciate and respect the fact that people, taking the time out to dial in and everything. For the meeting minutes, I know in the past we've had, and Robert, thank you for taking them last time and submitting them. Definitely appreciate that. I'll take the meeting minutes for this meeting, and I'll try to get more clarity if we're going to have a resource able to do it. Otherwise, come up with the plan, whether we share responsibility or. Yeah, go on, Rob.
Dan, there's going to be recording of this meeting.
It's recording right now.
Okay, so Brian, it's very difficult to chair the meeting and take the minutes. I used the recording from December, and I think Ryan, when he gets on, wanted to use the recording from January to do the minutes. Unfortunately, the recording for January was not complete. I still don't have an answer to that. So you should be able to use the recording when it's available. That will be a great asset to you in doing the minutes.
No, good point, Rob. Yeah, I'll try to get some light notes and top level conversation down, and then you're right, go back through it, but definitely good to know. If Ryan's not here by 7:10, we'll kick it off. I think we've been fair. And I'm glad everyone, thanks to all for joining as well. I know it was short notice that we were able to get kind of the go ahead. And thanks to Dan for championing us having the meeting as well. So, and
Okay.
Lou, who's not sure where Lou is, but
Ryan is in attendance as an attendee. I'm going to promote him to panelist.
nice.
I say I do see one phone number which I don't recognize. I don't know if that is Trustee Young or not. I do not have his number yet.
0592. Oh, he just texted me. I think that is Lou.
Oh, the 420-2044.
Yeah, it's not the one that matches his phone. Give me 1 sec. I'm just going to ask him if that's him though.
Okay.
2044. Yeah, it's Lou.
Okay.
Hey,
so-
Lou. Can we promote his phone number?
It doesn't give me that option. If it says allowed to talk, so I'm gonna think he just has to I think there's a code he has to put in to unmute himself. I cannot unmute him. Give me 1 second.
I think, isn't it 96? Something like that.
I'm gonna find out and oh,
All
it's,
right, can you hear me now?
yep, start. Okay.
Lou.
Yep.
Thanks for making it, Lou. Sorry for the.
Yeah, I don't know what's up with the Zoom, but I can hear you guys fine.
Okay.
Cool. All right, Dan, do you want to kick it off with the new business?
First you need to entertain a motion to open the meeting, second, and open the meeting.
All right, great. All right.
A
So I'd
motion
like to move
open
to.
the,
No, you take it, Ryan.
motion to open the meeting of the Traffic Commission for February 8th.
I second.
All right, I approve, so
You
good
say
to go.
all, you say all
All
in
in
favor?
favor?
Uh, I mean, you do have an agenda that was sent out to you, I believe it was last Thursday or Friday.
And there's only one order of new business, which is the West Street stop sign. And Ryan and Lou, if you didn't hear, the way that we're gonna try to handle this is discuss the new business first and then give folks on the line the opportunity to speak, because more than likely it'll be about the old business. If not, they'll be able to touch on the new business we're gonna discuss. And then we can move on and finish any old business remaining of the non-remaining speakers. So figure it makes sense to balance folks' time on the line. So kicking things off, do we have a chance to review? It was Michael DeVito who didn't dial in, but he sent over a packet with respect to the request for a stop sign on West Street. Include some photos of the intersection in question. I don't live too far from there, but I don't necessarily have a feel on. So if you're familiar with the corner of Weston Park by the DeChicos and Harrison, right on the border of Mamaroneck and Harrison, this is the corner that he's speaking of. And the ask is for at least 2 more stop signs in the direction from Harrison Ave and towards the Chicos. Stop signs. Not enough stop signs. I mean, I've walked that location before, and there are a number of stop signs. Let's see.
There's just one stop sign right before the Chicos. I used to live around West Street 5 years ago. And when you make that turn from Harrison Avenue going on to West Street, I don't think there's one stop sign until you get 1 block away from the Chicos. So I mean, I know where his house is. I'm not sure what he's talking about by seeing the cars go through.
Right.
I don't know exactly where he wants the stop signs. I had a little trouble reading the email.
There are not enough stop signs. I'm pretty sure that's a 4-way stop, at least Weston Park.
Well, West and Weston Park is the last intersection in the village on West Street heading towards DeChicos or towards really Harrison Avenue, Halsted Avenue. I think I've told other members of traffic safety commissions about the proper use of stop signs, and they're not speed control devices. They don't work as speed control devices. They're really supposed to inform right of way at intersections where you have accident history or some sort of physical condition in the roadway that makes the roadway somewhat difficult, some sort of geometric issue. You can certainly, I invite you to just Google the term "do stop signs slow down traffic," and basically when stop signs are installed as an attempt to try and slow down traffic, what winds up happening is people tend to speed up after the stop sign to make up for the perceived lost time. You're actually back up to full speed within about 150 feet. So I think the warrant for an all-way stop is supposed to have something like 5 accidents in a 12-month period. I mean, that's, where it demonstrates, significant accident history. This only came in last week, so I didn't get a chance to ask the PD for accident history, but I would be shocked if it's, that level of accidents.
I reread the email and I'm very familiar with that street. So he's right. When you make that turn, when you make that turn right onto West Street from Harrison Avenue, there is no stop sign. On the other, going the other way, there's a stop sign. When you make that right, there's no stop sign. So you are going, a good 4 or 5 blocks. I mean, I was literally his neighbor 5 years ago. So you do go 4 or 5 blocks and it is a little, a little funky, if cars are speeding, then they're not even anticipating a stop sign because they're going quickly. So that is a point. And also that West Street shared by Harrison as well. That's under the jurisdiction of Harrison as well as Mamaroneck.
Yeah,
I don't know if Dan, if you want to tell Harrison to put the stuff, to take care of it, but it is totally shared.
Let me share the screen so you just can get share my screen so you can get a view of
Brian, just a question. I saw that Gary had his hand raised. Are we?
Yeah, I actually was, you guys just answered my question. I thought that West Street was a boundary divider between Mamaroneck and Harrison. I wasn't sure if that was all in Mamaroneck.
So if you can see my screen, here's West Street. The intersecting streets are Pine Knoll, Rose Avenue, Rose Lane, Henry, and then that Henry is the last cross in the village. Everything else is in the town of Harrison.
So Park Street is in Harrison, right?
No, Park Park
Avenue.
goes into Mamaroneck and Harrison. The intersection of West Street and Park is actually Park. Yeah, sorry, Park is the last one.
Right.
Actually, no, Park and West Street is in Harrison.
Right, and that's where the stop sign is right now. See, that's a curvy street. So even when you put the stop sign, it's still, I'm not even sure which street to put it on.
Yeah, I mean,
I know it's curvy and winds.
yeah, I can see if I can pull up the street view as well from Google Earth.
I think the ask might be for a stop sign on West off of Henry, because you're right, Michael, like you could pick up a lot of speed there and you can't, it's very curvy, potential for blind spots. And then even if you follow the street view, there's a speed limit sign right next to the stop sign. Perhaps, a way to address this is make that more apparent or something to encourage drivers to slow down closer to Henry as opposed to another stop sign. I could see speed being picked up there and like your evidence from you living there as well. So
yeah, I wouldn't cross that street too much with kids.
I was there.
But the
this
problem is the
afternoon.
stop. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead and you finish.
Well, the problem is if you put a stop sign at West and Henry, then you have another stop sign just 1 block later.
right.
Who wants to stop twice within a block? So you'd have to put if we put a stop sign, the block before, which would be, is that Rose? I'm not sure if it's Rose or
That's Park.
yeah, the block before is Rose, and it's a very curvy. It's just, you're not going to see that stop sign for the last minute. It's very curvy, that road, I think.
Yeah, do you want to share the street view with you?
Yep.
on the screen?
I have some comments when it's appropriate.
Let me,
Hey, go on, Rob.
Okay. So going down west from Halsted.
I mean, from,
That
yeah, from DeChico's.
Okay. So when you get to Rose, because he talks about Rose and Park. So when you get to Park, Park has a three-way stop. So at the corner intersection of Park and West, there are three stop signs. There's no stop sign from Park because it's one way going towards West Street. So as you're continuing down West Street past Park and you get to Henry, there's a stop sign, I believe, on Henry as well. And between Henry and Rose, there's a 15-mile-per-hour sign. And there's also a sign indicating a curvy road. And there are two stop signs at the intersection of West and Rose. And I stood there for about 15 minutes and watched cars go down. Half the cars rolled through the stop sign on West. Very few actually came to a stop. And the cars, before they get to the stop sign, they were clearly going much faster. And they were going fast, coming from Harrison towards DeChico on West. So I think there are so many signs there. I think the solution is enforcement. There's just so many signs. People are just ignoring the signs. You could put more stop signs, you could put more signs. People are just ignoring them. I think enforcement is the solution.
Yeah, here's Henry and West. You can see the stop sign.
See the stop sign right there.
There's a
Right,
stop
but the complaint is the speed going up West Street. The stop sign on the intersection of Henry and West is not going to slow anybody up going.
Enforcement.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying that that's my house there and my old house. And, Mike DeVito's complained about the speed going up West. So the stop signs on the avenues, like wherever they are, Rose or Henry, is not going to slow up. I mean, it's nice that the stop signs there protects people, but I think his complaint is they're just going too fast. And like somebody said, enforcement, they're going past the speed limit. Yeah, there's another 15-mile-an-hour. That's the other direction. He's not talking about that direction.
Oh yeah, this is headed towards the village.
Right. So are there any like slow up 15-mile-an-hour signs going from Harrison Avenue toward DeChico's?
Let me.
Maybe that's what they're looking.
I didn't see any.
You know what's interesting, because I was looking at the street view on my machine, is that parallel to each other, there's two speed limit signs. And I think this speaks to one part being Mamaroneck, the other part being Harrison. One side says speed limit 25, the other side says speed limit 30. So like I could see it's even confusing to a driver, but.
Yeah, so
Dan, wasn't the speed limit limited to 25 last year?
on certain streets, I admit to not having that entire schedule memorized. I have to take a look at the code, but so here's an advisory sign for 20 miles an hour at can't tell which section that is.
What? I couldn't get on. They're talking about our house. That's funny. They're talking about our house. They wanted the stop sign.
Yeah, I mean, I see at least one speed advisory sign heading, I guess would be north towards Harrison. Not entirely sure of the orientation, but so that's the answer to that question.
Dan, do you think it's worth getting a study done to gauge the number of accidents that could help bolster the case for increased enforcement?
If I could just, Dan, if I could just interrupt for 1 second. I just ran a accident report from 2017 to 2021 for West Street, and I only found one motor vehicle accident in 2019, and that was a DWI accident.
Interesting. Thank you, Mark.
I think enforcement might be the way to go, because I don't see where we would put another stop sign if that's his main request. I just don't see it going from Harrison Avenue toward the Chico's, toward Holston. I wouldn't even know where to put the stop sign. You wouldn't want it on Henry Avenue because that's just a block away. So then you're going down by Rose, which is an awfully curvy street. I don't think you may not even see the stop sign until you kind of get around the corner.
So,
And the next block after Rose, I'm not sure which block that is.
just to answer I guess there was a question or a statement about the speed limit signs being 30 on one side or something. So this is the Park Avenue intersection, and that's in the town of Harrison. And since it's a coterminous town village, they say village speed limit. So I'm fairly confident that is a Harrison sign, not a Village of Mamaroneck sign. Yeah, you can see no trucks, all town roads. So this is Harrison's portion of the intersection, or Harrison's intersection. Do you want to stop sharing, or are there other questions about the street view?
I think that covers it. It seems to be consensus for just, I guess, more enforcement of speeding and stopping of the existing signs, but yeah, does anyone else have a compelling thought on that? Like, I think the addition of another stop sign, like with perhaps we take more time as well. Like I do not live far from that area, and quite frankly, I've walked that to Chico's a number of times, so I can collect some evidence on my own as well, just to validate a lot of what Rob and Michael are saying. But perhaps we just leave this on the agenda. We could reach out to, I forget his name, top of mind, who wrote in with us, and
Oh, Mike DeVito.
Mike DeVito. Yeah.
I
Thanks
guess-
for that. No, go on, Michael.
No, I was gonna say I guess you let the Google Earth map go, but
I can pull it back up if you want.
yeah, I just want to know what before Rose Avenue, what street there is. He said there's like 4 or 5 intersections, but I only count like 3.
I'm going to pull that up for you. Give me
Yeah.
1 second. So,
Let's start at
yeah, so this
Harrison
is,
Avenue. When let's go all the way down to Harrison Avenue and west. The other one,
here's Harrison Avenue and West.
right?
So the first cross street is Pine Knoll, which is a,
Okay, that's just to the left. That's just the one. That's just to the left side. Yeah.
then you
Go both
have
ways.
Rose Avenue,
Right.
which, extends, which dead ends at West Street.
Right.
Rose Lane, which dead ends at West Street.
Right.
Then you have Henry Avenue, which goes through, but I think Henry Avenue, like you mentioned, is a one-way street.
Henry Avenue.
Park is a
No,
one-way.
Henry Avenue is 2 ways, and then I think in Harrison,
Park is
Henry
one way.
going to Harrison is 1.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay, but it's in the village, very close to the border.
Right. I mean, if we were going to put another stop sign, like the only place I could see it going is by Rose Lane.
If you go to Google Earth and just quick, and we could do this quick. If you go to the corner of Harrison and West Street, there might be validity to a stop sign because there's no stop sign at Pine Knoll, none at Rose Lane. There isn't one at Henry. So you could really pick up speed going down till you actually hit Park.
You do pick up speed. I'm just wondering where you put the stop sign. It's
Yeah.
curvy and they're not even 2-way streets. The only 2-way street is like, Rose. You wouldn't put it at Henry because it's a block away. That's what I'm guessing
Yeah.
that would be inappropriate. So you go down to Rose, or Rose is the block right after you make the turn, and it's curvy. I'm not sure if people would pick it up.
Here's the intersection of West and Harrison.
Right.
Another at Harrison Avenue over here.
So if you go east on West, if you go up toward the Chico's east. Oh, we lost. Okay. That's it.
There's Pine Knoll, there's no stop.
Here's is this Rose Lane?
Yeah, Rose Avenue.
Rose Avenue, okay.
because Rose Lane comes up there.
Rose Lane, which dead ends. And, there is a stop sign on West Street here, but I think that may be more for, you don't have the best sight lines from west onto Henry, even though it's it's a dead end. And like I said, you already have cars parked on street over here, which I think is one of those things which, as I discussed, making the driver psychologically uncomfortable about speeding. This is kind of one of the ways you do it, is when you don't have the entire width of the roadway. Just this level of parking over here will probably be a factor in most drivers not speeding too greatly through there.
Can I interrupt?
Hey, go for it.
Sorry. We have a lot more issues to speak about. Do we want to talk about having a policy of how much time we want to spend on each case? I think it's something that the group should agree on and have a protocol of what's appropriate. If we continue on this, we really won't have much time to talk about some of the other issues that are also important. So maybe a group discussion would be appropriate.
I'm in favor of
Brian,
that.
I would take a walk with you, Brian, and take a look at it before we decide. I mean, we can decide today and just say it's just enforcement, because I don't see where to put the stop sign. Or we could just take one more look, because we're both familiar with that area, and then we could decide. Plus, we didn't give a chance for the resident, Mike DeVito, to weigh in. I don't know
Yeah,
what
so
protocol of that is.
it's a good point, Michael. I'm definitely in favor of that. And Robert, I agree with you to a degree, although it can be tough to create like an artificial time box. But I think moments like that, we're like, guys, like, let's move on. And I'll do a better job with that, of corralling the conversation. Hey, go on.
And just one more comment from my being on the commission last year. The commission tried to encourage people who had issues to call in so that we could ask them questions or get some more information. I know that we have a few people calling in, but it might have been beneficial if Mr. DeVito had participated in this discussion.
Yeah, I agree. I'll follow up with him after the call, and also as an action item, I'll walk the area with Michael before we make any sort of formal recommendation, because it's a tricky situation. We understand, based on folks that have actually lived there as well, that it is a little bit dicey, but we don't have enough proof or concrete information to make a deliberate recommendation. So, all right. With that, let's move on to the old business, but kind of in accordance with an idea to hear out, instead of just going in kind of the order of the old business, let's hear from the community. I guess we could just start top to bottom as far as giving folks on the line a chance to speak. So that said, let's kick it off with Amy. And Dan, do you mind promoting Amy?
Yeah, I've given Ms. Buckbinder the permission to speak. So I'll just do, okay.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Amy.
I live on Claflin Avenue. I emailed you guys between Rushmore and Sylvan. And I live on the side of the street where there are signs that you're not allowed to park on that side of the street. And then on the other side of the street, there are several signs: no stopping, no standing, one of which was just added last month. And that was the only available, like, 2 parking spots on the street that you could actually park and have a guest or a worker or whatever. Our driveways are not big enough to have multiple cars. And the 2 spots that we had to park on that street are now gone. Part of the issue is there's a house being built next door to me and the construction vehicles park on the wrong side of the street. They park on the side of my house. Of which I actually have gotten a ticket for doing it. They don't, which again, I'm not looking for people to get tickets, but I'm looking for a place where I can park on the street, where I can have a grandparent park on the street. And we now, based upon the signs, they're very confusing. And it seems to me that one side has no parking on this side, and the other side basically has no standing, no parking, no standing, all the way down the other side. And all the other streets in Orienta that are not a major thoroughfare allow parking, at least on one side of the street. So I'm just looking, and I did also, after I got my ticket there, I went to the police department and asked, could they help me, tell me where I can park when I need to pull out of the driveway? And they were unsure when they came. They were nice enough, they came, they took a look, but yeah, so that's the street. So on the left side, that's that whole side you're not supposed to park on of the picture that I'm looking at. And on the right side, if you look a little further down, there's a sign that says no parking or no standing. And then if you go up the other direction of the street, as you go up, there's various signs, one of which was added last month.
I think we talked about, oh, I'm sorry.
No, Dan, I was going to ask if you could explain about Claflin and maybe why it wasn't brought to the Traffic Commission first, rather the Board of Trustees that handled it last month.
So the request came in from the resident who we established the restriction in front of property in front of. The issue is that because of its proximity to the park, there were a lot of vehicles parking in this area and tearing up the public right of way because they're parking on the grass. It was just a matter of having to repair this constantly every single year. The most affected resident was the one who actually requested it because they can't park in front of their home. So that's why we went to the board with this item.
The new sign, I spoke to the resident, the new sign is at 330 Claflin Avenue. And she was just as surprised as to why that sign was added.
I can take a look at the resolution. I thought it was something like 300 feet from the intersection. Maybe there was.
I'm not talking about the one you're looking at right now. That
Oh,
sign has been there for a long time. I'm talking back further up Claflin. Okay, right in front of that white house, right there where the white wall ends, a new sign has been put up. It's not even on Google Earth yet.
Oh, this
So,
one. Right. on.
Nope. The other direction where follow that white wall up
Yep.
to the right, up higher the street. Nope, the other direction.
So where
little
the
more.
white wall becomes a stone
Right
wall?
where the white wall and the brick wall meet, a new sign has been added there that says no stopping or no standing. So those were like the two spots that you could park on the entire street.
Let me take a look at the resolution that was adopted because I'm not sure we're supposed to go up that far, but I have to take a look at the resolution.
Okay. And it
Okay.
has to do with the construction, I'm sure. The construction vehicles are on the other side of the street. So when people actually parked in those spots, you couldn't get down the street. But the construction vehicles were the ones that are wrong.
How I interpreted it was that this has been a perennial issue. But let me take a look at that resolution just to
Thank
make
you.
sure.
Yeah, so right where those two walls meet, a sign is now there.
Yeah, I thought it was supposed to be like up here, but I'll check.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Amy. Thank you, Dan. Does Robert, anyone else have any comments? Seems like Dan's ahead of us on this with the board.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing the screen then.
Thanks, Amy.
And listen, I would be okay if you took the signs, no parking on my side. There needs to be an like none of our driveways are big enough for people to park in. Even like the other day I had just a plumber came and he was like, where can I park? And there's nowhere. Because my driveway only fits my 2 cars.
Yeah, that's tough. We'll stay close to it and at least get some clarity on it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, next we have, we'll move on to Cindy Goldstein.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm a member of the Village Planning Board, and we spent a considerable amount of time reviewing the 1043 Boston Post Road chopped application. They came before us because they were changing a building from a bank to a chopped restaurant. And they got site plan approval last December. But one of the things, as part of our review, we are charged with dealing with traffic and pedestrian safety. And if you're familiar with the Boston Post Road, directly across from Mamaroneck High School, it's right next door to the Equinox facility. There's a bank there, which probably was not very interesting to teenagers. However, we suspect, and so do the owners of Chopped, that restaurant will be exceedingly popular. And because the high school, the 1,200 students and the 150 faculty members all take lunch from 11 to 12 every day, we were particularly concerned with pedestrian safety. And if you have the misfortune of driving through there on school days between 11 and 12, you see large groups of kids running across the road. They're not respecting and going to the 2 crosswalks, one at the main parking entrance of the high school and then the one down closer to Rich Bell Road. So in fact, a somewhat anecdotal discussion of this was about a third of the kids, 28%, 169 pedestrians cross mid-block. And that's before the chop goes in. So what we discovered was the Department of Transportation for New York State controls Route 1. The applicant really can't put in any kind of pedestrian safety control measures because they're not allowed to do anything without the permission of the Department of Transportation. So we actually attended a meeting in November with DOT and the applicant to try to brainstorm about what could be done. And the answer was the applicant isn't responsible. They really can't do anything except to cooperate. So the planning board wanted to come to the Traffic Commission to see what recommendations you might come up with, because although there has been no serious accident in that area, we don't want to take any chances with the kids in our community. And we are really interested in discouraging people from crossing mid-block. So, I'm sure Mr. Sardoff knows all about the Department of Transportation and their extreme independence and the time that it takes to get anything from them. So if the village were to want to do something, you'd have to get permission of the DOT. And of course, then I assume that the village would have to pay for it. So we investigated alternatives like no left-hand turn out of Chopped. That wasn't going to, nobody thought that was going to work. There was talk about some flashing lights to go to highlight the fact that it's a speed zone in front of a school. But we're sort of looking for your expertise on helping with this and hopefully to prevent any kind of serious situation. And the reason, certainly Chopped is going to need a few months to get their building up to speed and their operation going. But I also suspect that it'll take more than a few months to get the DOT to approve anything if you were to recommend something in terms of additional safety measures. So I'm here to answer any questions, but that's, really where this application came from to your desks to try to help us all figure out the best way to go about this.
You're still muted, Brian.
Thanks, Dan. Sorry about that. You'd think after 2 years I'd have this down by now. Thank you, Cindy, for bringing this back up. I know last month this was a very large topic of conversation within the group. I agree, and this is just my take. I'd be curious for others within the group that I agree that, you know, this is going to be tough to enforce punitively, and that there's already a red light, and you know, let's say a couple 100 yards down the road, and this has already been raised with Mamaroneck High School, and their policy is to treat their students as adults and make decisions to the best of their abilities with an open campus. But have we tried approaching the student council or student organization or whatever it's called within the high school to try and get the message to come from another kid rather than from an adult? I may be late to that, but I've been thinking about this between meetings, and you know, getting anything put into place like may not even work because kids may end up and probably will jaywalk anyway. But have we had the message come from the students to another student about safety and all of that?
Well, it certainly was nothing the planning board was involved in. You know, the problem is you have a whole new set of students after 4 years. You know, every year you have a new crop of students. So I don't think we were even envisioning anything like that. But if we can't change the student behavior, and I've raised teenagers, I kind of understand that that's a brick wall. Why can't we put extra flashing lights to really remind drivers to slow down in that area? Because there's going to be, I believe, a lot more mid-block crossing. So, you know, it would be ideal to train the students, but I think that's a losing battle, and it has to be done constantly. So again, if there could be another set of flashing lights cautioning drivers to go slower or to be aware, that was sort of what I think the planning board had in mind. I agree with the high school, let the kids police themselves, but on the other hand, we have a responsibility. We put something very attractive across the street and they're going to run over, you know, across the street between cars. I've seen it. It's, you know, it's a recipe for disaster eventually.
Dan, last time we met, did we have a chance to talk about the impact of the possibility of flashing lights in that zone? I thought you had some context for us.
We didn't really discuss, I don't think so. But I was thinking, you know, there is also a standing Safe Routes to School committee, which is composed of professional staff from the village, the school district, volunteers from the PTA. I can't remember who is the chair right now, but would you like me to also ask them to take a look at this? Gosh, I can't remember the chair's name right now. I apologize. It escapes me. Is that something that the planning board also asked about or considered, or did you come directly to the Village Traffic Safety Commission?
We came straight to the top. Again, because the coordination would have to be a request to Department of Transportation, and the village would have to, I assume, have a budget line for this. So it didn't seem that the Safe Routes to School or a volunteer committee was the way to go. We did try to engage the school district. We tried to brainstorm to have Chopped deliver meals across the street. You know, we can't force anybody to do that. So we thought you guys were the place to come.
But didn't we, I felt like, Dan, that we went through this a little bit last week, that there was, and the police department also reported that there wasn't a lot of incidents over the last 3 years in that zone. you know, I think Cindy's right with new, you know, new opportunities to go eat across the street. That's going to draw students to that spot, and certainly want them to go to that spot, but we want them to do that safely. But there's also other restaurants in that area, and we haven't seen a lot of issues arise from the current restaurants that are over there and students crossing the street, right? So that was sort of my takeaway from last week's meeting, and adding additional lights could be a step in the right direction to show that we are being proactive in that regard. And I think we want to keep all children safe in our village, but that we didn't really see that there was a tremendous amount of need for that additional signage or the additional lights, because there hasn't been incidents reported by the police department. Was that your, Dan?
Yeah, that's what I recall. I think one of the other things we discussed is, you know, there is a very proud tradition in the Northeast United States of jaywalking. And, you know, I've seen it, you know, as I didn't bring this up last meeting, but Mr. Dempsey know that, you know, he had worked with me on projects in the past, both in the village of Mamaroneck and my former employer. You know, he once did a study for us where he was, you know, standing 10 feet away from a crosswalk with a police officer, and, you know, pedestrians were crossing right next to him, jaywalking 10, 15 feet away from a crosswalk, with both he and a law enforcement professional there. Ultimately, you know, it's a dedication of resources to either enforce it or to enhance the driver awareness in the area. Like I said, I you know, lacking enforcement, and I know it's very difficult. It's going to be very difficult to change that pedestrian behavior.
Right, and we talked, and Dan, you know, I'm looking back here at my notes, and we talked a lot about how students can legally cross in a number of places over there, as well as, you know, putting up these no pedestrian crossings that they're not enforceable. The police department can't enforce some of those no pedestrian crossings. But one of the ideas, and maybe this gets to what Cindy's looking for, you know, we talked about this idea of one of these, you know, these beacon radar speed signs, those that show people their speed limit. Do we have anything like that over in that zone? I mean, I drive, like all of us, we drive Boston Post often, and that's a spot where, you know, I try to slow down, and you know, I always feel like that other people are kind of whizzing through there. Is there a way to beacon signs that show your speed? Does that help?
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, we talked about that. I mentioned we have both the speed wagons that I think the police department has 2 of those. Then we have a couple of speed boards. You'll see them on Mamaroneck Avenue by the Mamaroneck Avenue Elementary School. I've actually, not as part of this discussion, but in discussing the concept of speed humps, we had a conversation about, you know, deploying additional or purchasing additional speed boards. So I actually reached out to our traffic engineering consultant, Mr. Carmody from AKRF, for some recommendations and pricing options. So I'm actually collating that information right now on that matter.
But we wouldn't be able to do speed bumps in that area. Are you also looking at the cost of some of these? I think you call them those beacon radars.
Yeah, that's what I've asked our traffic engineer.
Okay, so both the speed bump piece.
Well, not the speed bump, because and we can discuss that. I know there's an item a little bit later talking about speed bumps. And I just wanted to give you an update on the conversation that we had with the board in December about a pilot program for speed humps. We actually had a meeting on that last week. And in my research, the application of speed humps and some of the public safety agencies are not supportive of that in general. But you wouldn't put them on an arterial roadway or a collector roadway. It really meant more for local roads. But I actually can share an email that I had sent out in advance of that meeting with the Board of Traffic Commissioners, so you can see some of the information I found on this.
Okay, so if we can come back and Brian, I don't know if, where you're at with this, but looking at what we discussed last week, and we had Mr. Dempsey, Mr. Gould with us, and now Cindy's here. I think it's incumbent on us to come up with an idea of how we slow traffic down. We know we can't put a crosswalk in, we can't put an overpass in. We can't do a lot of things in that area, but maybe we can, curtail the speeders by putting up some signage that tells people they're going too fast in that area. With this new, I think irrespective of Chopped, I think that is probably good all the way around, right? That we have people driving slower through that school zone near the high school.
It makes total sense.
I just have a point. So putting a beacon speed sign going south, I don't even see where you'd put that, because you have the stoplight before, and then the restaurants are just another, 30 feet down. So I guess you're talking about the beacon stop sign going north. I just don't see the effectiveness of the one going south. That's how I'm visualizing it.
Yeah,
Because
Mike,
you have the traffic light right by the high school, and
Yeah.
then people are going to cross just another 15 yards down to get to Chop It. So after you stop, there's nowhere to put the sign, the beacon sign. So it would just have to be. I think it would be very good, obviously, to go north. Does anyone see that?
No, I agree, because how much speed can you pick up from the traffic light that's right there?
Yeah, there's no space. There's
Yeah.
not a lot of yardage to go.
Gary, did you have something that you want to add?
Yes, so I've been, like everybody else, I've been working from home for the last 2 years. And I'm actually a member of Equinox, and so I'm there periodically during the day. That I'm surprised, and this ties into Chopped coming in there, which I think would be great for the village and great for the high school kids to have a place to go that's healthy. I'm surprised that there's no flashing lights there. That's school zone. And I know that during the morning, when I go over to Equinox, the village is out there with radar, giving out tickets. So that's certainly an area that, there's a lot of speeding going on in. And if you go to back to Rye, or you go even into Harrison where the schools are, because we lived there before we were here, all the schools have flashing lights that say slow down school zone. So the kids are gonna, high school kids, I have 2 teenagers, they're gonna run across that street to be the first one in line to get their salad, no matter what we do. So this is all, in my opinion, all sounds great, but they're gonna run right out the door and plan to be the first one there. So I think we should talk about getting flashing lights there, not only for Chopped, which hopefully, opens up, but to just slow people down in general outside of a high school. That's how I feel.
I mean,
Good point.
I can reach out to our traffic engineer. I just got to make sure about whether or not we need permission from the state on this one. Let me follow up on that.
And if I can just, in closing, sorry, CHOP needs a permit from the Department of Transportation. And I believe their application is still pending because the Department of Transportation moves on their own schedule. So that's why there was some sense of urgency for any recommendation to come from the village while they're evaluating everything, and it could be part of an integrated package. that, all of the safety potential issues would be addressed at one time with the Department of Transportation, and it might make things move a little smoother. And Dan, we did, I believe, work with the AKRF traffic consultant. So they should be pretty familiar with the site. I think they did a report. I think they did a visual. So they should be ready to go on this.
I can reach out to Mr. Carmody tomorrow. And I did ask Mr. Dempsey at the last meeting, what type of time frame the DOT is currently operating under for reviewing and approving permits. And I think he says it was about 6 months at the kind of a minimum right now. But I can certainly get some more information on that.
All right, thank you all very much for taking a look at this.
Thank you, Cindy.
Of course.
All right. Next up, we have David Bard, who his item is on, it's number 5 on old business, and he's also emailed us a few times regarding his concern on Palmer Ave. Dave?
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm at a high school basketball game, so you may hear some noise in the background. Thanks for inviting me, responding to all my emails. Yeah, the issue I think you're now familiar with, given our exchanges, is the left turn from Palmer heading up to Rockland to the high school, the Palmer parking lot, primarily during the rush hour in the morning and getting the kids to school. I think there's 2 concerns. Because there's no left arrow, and there's a lot of traffic coming the opposite direction, there really is there's rarely time to make a clean left turn. And so what happens is the cars that are waiting in line either try to beat the other car off the line, in other words, make that left right as the light is turning green, or they have to wait until the light essentially turns yellow or maybe even red to make the left turn. I would say on average at that time, there's probably 2 cars that are getting through each cycle, 2 to 3 cars each cycle. As an example, and I emailed you all this morning, and I was a little bit coy saying a car almost got in an accident. It was actually me. As I was trying to make a left at the back end of the light, and admittedly, the light had probably, as I was in the intersection, the light was turning red. A car that was coming straight the other direction in the lane closest to the double yellow was speeding to try to make the light on that side. So it's a little bit of a different issue, but he had to basically brake hard. And I had to speed through to get across. So, I mean, that's just an example, but that kind of, hedging, hesitation, trying to get across and beat the light, both the front end and the back end, happens every single day. I'm taking my kids to school every day and I observe it. It feels to me like if there haven't been any accidents there, it's just a matter of time. It's very, very unsafe. I'm happy to answer questions, but you guys are the experts. I'm just telling you what I observe for being there every day.
Yeah, I remember we discussed this briefly at the end of last meeting. It came in late. I believe Mike and I both, again, I brought it up on Google Street View. I know exactly what you're talking about on this turn. I believe Palmer and Weaver has the same issue where it's downright impossible to make a left turn, and during times of heavy traffic, whether it's during school, and as I observed it during the holiday time, cars just wait. Luckily, if a car is fortunate, they can make the left turn after the light turns red, but otherwise that traffic just backs up with folks looking to try and make a left onto Rockland. So I get it. I'll open it up to the group. Right? I think it's a big problem. There's already 2 lanes there, so it doesn't make sense to me why there isn't some semblance of left turning, because the right lane can also go straight. I mean, you could make the case that it's an even greater safety problem by not giving a dedicated left, because folks on the right can either go right or go straight, and people can get frustrated waiting for the left and then decide to go straight. It's a problem from what I've seen in my experience. So does anyone have any thoughts? Yeah, go on, Rob.
I live right at that location. And so I understand the problem. Dan, I thought someone said that those traffic lights aren't capable of installing a left turn signal. Am I correct?
I don't know if they are or not. I'd have to have I have to get a quote from our traffic engineer to take a look at it to see what it can accommodate. If we had to replace the entire traffic signal, I mean, that's a several $100,000. But yeah,
And
Yep.
what about the possibility of a delayed green on the other side coming towards, like, let's say you're Palmer going towards Larchmont and making it clear to the drivers? That to me seems like signage, giving the people the opportunity to make that left. Is that
Again,
feasible?
it would depend on the capabilities of the signal hardware. Yeah, they'd have to review the hardware and say what you can or can't do with it. So I don't have an answer to that question, but I have to get, what I do is I would get a quote from the traffic engineer. Depending on that, if I need to go to the board to ask for money, we would do that. But that would be the first step to see what the capability of that signal is.
With the kind of the mission intent of the traffic commission, should we particularly, I mean, I know it's always going to be a consideration, but should that be a driver to us? Like, if we have consensus that it's a dangerous situation, needs to be addressed, should we make the recommendation irrespective of budget or cost?
If you have a recommendation, I would make the recommendation, but only the board of trustees can direct the manager and the staff.
Mhm.
So I would, take a look at that. I would get the questions answered. If it was a minimal cost, I think we would have money in the existing budget. If there was, a significant cost, I would have to, bring that to the board's attention and ask for some additional funds. If it got to the point that it was, going to be a major capital project, we would have to prioritize that in the context of other traffic signal priorities in the village. I'm gonna, one of the items I'm gonna put on the work session next week, following up on the larger conversation we've had about the Waverly Avenue intersection. I asked our traffic engineer to give us information on the series of Mamaroneck Avenue signals to promote both traffic safety and traffic flow, which sometimes are at across odds with each other. But we would have to prioritize that in the context of everything else. But if there's a the short version is, if there's a recommendation, make it. We'll review it and see how we can proceed with that.
Okay. Does anyone else have any thoughts? Yeah, go on, Ryan.
Yeah, I think I'd like to make a motion that we recommend Dan et al. Take a look at this and see what's viable on the capabilities of that light first and foremost. I don't think we need to get bogged down in budget, but I'd like to make a motion that Dan take a look and report back at the next meeting.
Are you talking about the delayed green light or including a new
What the
traffic?
capabilities of reprogramming that light? Are we able to put a turn signal at that light? Are we able to reprogram that light and do a delayed green? What's the capability of the light? None of us know. And there's no reason to have a discussion of cost or anything else at this moment. We just need to identify the capabilities. And we discussed a little bit of that right at the tail end of the last meeting, but nobody made a motion.
I
So I'm
second that.
making one now.
I didn't, just a point of protocol, I didn't realize we need a motion to add for Dan, who I think you already agreed to look into it,
Well,
right?
I think there,
It's just protocol. I don't know.
To make a recommendation for him to look at it?
Yeah, I think he already agreed to look at it. No,
I think he's asked 3 or 4 times, Michael, for a recommendation.
I got it.
So that's
Okay.
our
That's what
recommendation.
I
then.
heard,
Yeah.
and we discussed it at the last meeting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if it's a formality, let's do it.
Yes, I'm. It's not-
So that's
Is it a
all.
formality?
That's it.
Brian, you decide.
Yeah, I'm in favor. Let's do it, Dan.
Yeah.
Let's, that's the official recommendation. I don't think there's any opposition towards it. Like,
Yeah, let's look and see what the capabilities are.
right. All right, we'll keep in touch, Dave, and we'll try and have an update by the next meeting, or we'll get you something over email as well, but seems to
Okay,
be
great.
group consensus on this issue. So thanks for hammering it
Great.
home.
No, appreciate you taking the time and hearing me out. Thanks, everyone.
All right, next up, we have Meg Jurgen.
okay, you would also allow Mr. Littman as well. I think it's the same location.
Oh, it's the same? Yeah.
Hi, this is Meg. Thank you for promoting me. I don't believe we have any additional remarks. We're just looking for how you guys are approaching our situation and the requests that we made. Richard, are you there?
I'm here.
Well, I was gonna write up, I think there was the one recommendation about the some no parking signs. I did have a question for Ms. Jurgen or Mr. Littman. Have you ever considered constructing a driveway apron to define the driveway entrance into the garage?
Can you promote me?
You have been promoted.
Oh, okay. I don't see myself on the screen. We have an apron.
Well, I mean, it's a concrete apron. It's not like,
Yeah.
there's, you know, I was thinking like you would see in a normal, like most, modern multifamily or, apartment buildings, things like that. It's right now, it's just a concrete, it's an entire concrete
Well,
apron, curbs, no.
there's a curb cut surrounded by probably a 10 or 15 foot concrete apron around the garage entrance.
I mean, the,
So when you say construct a driveway apron, well, how would that differ from what we have?
well, I think you'd have like, curbs, a paved surface, or at least curbs to define the entrance into and out of the garage.
Dan?
Yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You recently told me to look at a building on Phillips.
Yeah.
I think it was 355 Phillips Park.
Yeah.
They have a garage. Why don't Meg and Richard check that out? They may have some idea of what you're talking about when they see that.
Yeah, I mean,
Is that correct address you told me? Dan?
yeah, I mean, I think one of the issues that even though there's signs on the garage doors, it's set pretty far back from the street.
But Dan, I don't really understand your suggestion because that's your sidewalk. That's village property.
Yeah, but you can have a curb cut and a driveway onto the.
You say a curb cut, are you meaning a cut separates it from the sidewalk or from the street? I don't understand where the curb would go.
what I meant was a defined, like paved driveway instead of the concrete.
Well, I think we did a pretty good job of sharing is that people don't look down. So you can see where the driveway is indicated because it's not the It's eased into the road. It doesn't have the same kind of sidewalk structure there. But what we find is that in the dark or in the evening time, nobody is looking down and the building is pretty far back. So I'm not sure that anything on the ground is going to make much difference unless it's fluorescent yellow paint, which I suggested, describing our driveway that might shine. But other than that, that's why we really felt that some kind of signage that would be the line of sight of the driver to say you can't park between this sign and this other sign is really what's called for here if we're going to stop people from parking there. It's also the driveway that's next door to our building. People are parking there. So it could be just two signs, one that was on the far side of the driveway and the one on the other side of our driveway.
Remember, our initial request was to daylight the parking area on either side of the driveway. So even putting some kind of structural change that you're suggesting on the sidewalk is not going to improve the visibility and the hazard going in and out of the garage on a curve of the very busy post road.
And if you can remember, we also had the suggestion of putting a sign that you cannot park so many yards from the intersection of Stewart Avenue and the Boston Post Road. Right now, there is no prohibition to park right on top of the intersection. The sign that's there is only the hours you can park. It has nothing to do with, you cannot park any closer to the corner. So that would be a third sign that we suggest for safety on that intersection. That's both, that's mostly for when you're trying to turn out of that road, whether it's a right-hand turn or a left-hand turn. We went through this last time, the way it curves. You really have a very little visibility. When somebody parks there and they're close up on that intersection, you cannot see anything in the right-hand lane as well as the left-hand lane. It blocks all coming traffic. And because it's a downhill there and it's going around a curve, it's between two lights. Usually people are picking up speed and they're usually going faster than the speed limit as they go around that curve. So it would be very helpful to have a much wider view when you're sitting in that intersection trying to turn out onto the Boston Post Road. It seems odd to me that there's not one of those signs that you can't park from here to the intersection. I thought it was pretty common practices on intersections that you don't allow parking right smack up on top of the intersection itself.
But the primary concern is the safety of the driveway area.
Ryan, question for you. As you had the minutes from last meeting, if I recall, did we have a deliberate action item to take out of Richard and Meg's concerns?
Right. I mean, yeah, we discussed the daylighting and to ascertain whether we could have that signage on Stewart Avenue so cars couldn't park all the way up. But we were looking at painting the sidewalk with yellow or the daylighting area. Those are the two things that we discussed. And we didn't really have any stats on injuries or incidents, but the residents of the building had expressed continuous frustration and concern with the blocking of visibility. That's what I had in my notes.
Thank you very much. If I could just clarify, you said a sign on Stewart Avenue. It's not a sign on Stewart Avenue. It would
Post Road.
Boston Post Road coming out of Stewart, right?
Leading to Stewart. Yeah. Just want to
Yeah.
make sure that's clear. Yeah. Thanks.
So if you want, what I can do is let me prepare a draft resolution with your recommendation and maybe a map or a crude map to show where the parking would be restricted for the next meeting.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Dan. I mean, over the last month or so, I've paid attention to that specific area as coming out of I have to make that turn onto Post Road frequently from the other side. And I've seen a couple times trucks blocking and actually cars parked up on the sidewalk, attesting to what Meg and Richard are saying. So
But what I can do is maybe, is Meg or Richard, one of you better just to coordinate with offline, just to make sure this is, what I write up is in accordance with this discussion?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
okay. All right, perfect. Thanks, Dan. And thanks, Ryan, because I thought the same. I didn't think we had a clear action item. And thank you, Meg and Richard, for dialing back in. And,
Yeah, thank you very
checking
much
in.
for considering this. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yep. All right, that covers all the callers and also covers about half of the old business. Before we move on to the existing old business, does anyone have a comment on any of what we covered so far? All right, cool. Let's move on. We covered shop, we covered Hawthorne Gardens. Moving on to the existing old business, Crown Court stop sign speed bump. Let me just bring that back up.
Just, on the issue of speed bumps or speed humps, as I mentioned, we had a meeting last week to talk about, a pilot program as requested by the Board of Trustees. And I just emailed the commission a copy of an email I had sent out in advance of that meeting to talk about the concept of where you place these in general. And I'll make sure I send a copy to you too as well, Lieutenant Gatta. We talked about a pilot program, with 2 locations, possibly one in Washingtonville and one in Rhinebeck. So we are going to look at it. I can't give an answer as to how these would ultimately be, installed in the village until we kind of go through this pilot program. But I don't know if Crown Court would be or is it Raleigh Road would be a good location or not, but I just wanted to at least give you a heads up on what we're looking at in terms of the speed humps.
Yeah, the Crown Court, I brought it up now. If anyone else has it in front of them. I think this ties into the other item right below it with the Mamaroneck Ave at 95 crossing guard. Speed bump plus bump sign. Ryan, on that one, did we have any clear action items coming out of it? Because perhaps maybe now we take a look at Street View to see if it would be a good candidate for the pilot program. But I don't remember anything top of mind, but
What I had is that that we were investigating the speed humps potential. I don't have anything more specific than that to be honest. That was what that action was number 3. I'm trying to, I only have one screen right now.
Yeah, it's number 3.
That's number 3 on it. Yeah.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, I just I just have the speed humps. We'll pursue that. That's it. As actions.
Yeah. So
Brian?
Yep.
Are we still talking about Norwood and Crown Court?
Yes, it's
Okay,
number
can I-
3. Yeah.
Okay, let me add some information because this came up last year again, and I'm going to read some comments after the meeting. It's a little short paragraph. This is from the chairman from last year. At our meeting tonight, a resident asked for a stop sign at the intersection of Norwood and Crown Court. The commissioners and residents that were present at the meeting and familiar with the intersection noted that it was a dangerous spot. I asked the commissioners to do a drive-by to familiarize themselves before the next meeting. However, we have no knowledge base of calming or mitigation possibilities. How do we access the traffic consultant for possible solutions to this intersection? Unfortunately, this issue never came up again.
No, thanks for the context, Rob. So how do we proceed? Would it make sense for us to provide some kind of boots on the ground, unless someone on the line is familiar, but I don't think so, just to see if it's a good candidate? Would it be too forward to consider it for that pilot program without having full analysis on the area? I tend to think that way, but open to others' feedback. If not, I can, I'm happy to go over there. I could try to make it a point to go towards the school times as well, just to get a better feel for what this resident is going through. And I don't think we've heard from this resident in a year plus. So I think it would make sense to ask them to join the meetings and raise the concerns and just give their experience as well. It's another thought, but. Okay, we can go with. Let's go with that, because there's a lot that we don't know. Like, we know that it's been raised at least a year ago, and we have this pilot program, which is great, and we want to get the community involved as much as we can, but at the same time, we want the community to speak to their experience as well. But there's some diligence that we could do. All right, I'll take that away. So the next one was, it was the same email where they wrote in with the Mamaroneck Ave and I-95 ramp crossing guard. And I remember we were discussing rather, the fact that we have crossing guards in some of those locations, and the area that we thought where they wanted a crossing guard didn't seem like it made a whole lot of sense, or that people wouldn't be crossing where we thought they were speaking of. I think, Michael, you were making that point because I think you might have lived over there, if memory serves me right.
Well, I drive by there every day and I'm not sure the direction, but I think the crossing guard is on the side where the I-95 entrance is. But I think they're talking about across the street where people will walk down to school in the Harbor Heights area. So they're walking the other side of the street and they're walking down toward the school, and there is an I-95 exit going onto Boston Post Road, onto Mamaroneck Avenue, going south. So there's a small little area where there's a stop sign, but the kids and the parents still have to cross that little area, and there's nothing but a stop sign. And with stop signs, the cars kind of push through the stop sign. So I took a look at it today, and there should be some kind of crosswalk, I don't know, or something to advise, to alert the motorist that there's going to be crossing, like maybe school crossing of some sort. But my main question was, I wanted to hear from whoever brought the complaint up, like how many people are actually walking over that spot, by that spot.
Yeah, go on, Rob.
I thought the problem was on the other side of the street, because the entrance to 95, there is no stop sign or reason for cars going to the 95 to slow down or beware of pedestrians. I thought it was the other side of the street.
Yeah, I'm confused on which side it is. If it's the, I'm talking about the opposite side of the street, because on that side where I-95 is, when you're walking toward the school, there's no sidewalk there. It can't be on that side. There's like a bridge and there's no sidewalk. So if you're on the side of the entrance to I-95 and you're walking, you can't get from, I don't know what that cross street is, or where the crossing guard is. No one's going to walk to school on that side. because you're, like I said, there's no sidewalk underneath, I guess, there's an overpass. So I'm thinking about the other side, which is, I think they changed the exit numbers, but the other side is where there's an exit off of I-95 onto Boston Post Road. I thought you were talking about that side. I don't know if we could get a Google Earth up, Dan, or if anyone knows what intersection I'm talking about. I could be wrong, but that's the intersection that I focused on.
Hey, Dan, do you mind bringing it up? I'm not sure either. I mean, it may inevitably be, we ask them to dial in and just give us clarity on their experience and like where they're talking about specifically.
Yeah, but I mean, if they're walking from Harbor Heights south of the school, it has to be on the other side of the I-95 entrance.
I just had, my one note that I had in here is that, we needed to do a little bit more research. And, Michael, you had thought that you could maybe do a little, and you have, do a little bit more digging and a little bit more follow-up with the person that issued the concern.
Yeah, I thought I was gonna do that last time, but I never got a hold of the name of the person. So if someone could help me out with that, I'll contact them.
So here's Norwood. This is I guess it would be the west side of the street. And there's a sidewalk. And there's a sidewalk on the east side as well. This is the southbound exit of
Oh, right.
and then
Oh,
there's the entrance. And then, sorry, there's our speed trailer. So you can see that it is used.
yeah, that where that white car is, yeah.
Yep. And then here's the crossing from, across.
Right there. So that's what we're talking about.
I mean,
That's what I thought we were talking about. I mean, those traffic cones are because there's construction, but usually.
well, we put the traffic cones out because of the speed trailer. We had or this could have been from post Ida. It's October 2021. So, but I mean, there are sidewalks on.
On the left side. Oh, I didn't notice that.
Yeah, that was the step down. Was this the step down transformer? Yeah, that was it. And then that's the throughway yard that's currently being used. There's the other entrance and exit, but you're not allowed to make a left turn from this lane into there. So you do have sidewalks the entire length of Mamaroneck Avenue between Norwood and the Mamaroneck Avenue School. You have a signalized intersection at North Berry, a signalized intersection at Hillside. Most of the major crossings do have a signal of some sort. Just gonna back up. All right, this is when we had the generator and the step down transformer that Con Ed put out.
Okay, so there's a sidewalk, there's no crosswalk there though.
That's a throughway property. I don't know if we can put a crosswalk. I'm not sure about the warrant for that. I couldn't.
Is our, Dan, sidebar question, do we have is our paint machine up and running yet?
We have to replace it. The machine was destroyed by Ida. We have flooding conditions at the DPW yard, and the machine has shuffled loose the mortar coil and probably some other coils as well.
Well, when we get a machine, there's going to be a lot of work for it to do.
Yeah. I think we rent machines or hire companies to do work for us, but it'll be nice to get the replacement machine.
Sure.
So it sounds like, Michael, I just shot you an email with the contact, the woman's email address. So maybe just shoot her an email and yeah, I'd appreciate that if you
Sure.
can ask
And-
her to hop on.
So I'm a little confused. So is it at the entrance of the I-94-5 North? Is it at the I-95 North entrance? Or is it the one that I was talking to on the other side, which was the exit?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
That's what I'm wondering because,
Ultimately, the deployment of, the school crossing guards is a matter for the police department. I mean, I don't know that they would necessarily prioritize this location over another location where you have multiple cross streets. And,
right. I mean, it's clearly more unsafe at the I-95 North exit. I think there's more traffic going there than the exit off.
Yeah, if I could
Going
just,
south.
if I could just say, I
I'll
believe,
contact that person.
I believe it was the southbound side because we have our crossing guard posted out on Merrimack Avenue, Soundview Avenue. And it's to cross people to the west side to go south to the school.
Right.
So it should be the southbound exit by the overpass of I-95 is what we're talking.
Right. But there's still no crossing guard at the I-95 North entrance.
Correct. But I believe the complaint was the southbound is where the issue was taking place.
I agree. I agree.
So yeah, the crossing guard is over here at Soundview and Norwood, basically.
Okay, I'll look into it.
And thank you, Mark. So we covered the light at Palmer and Rockland. Let's move on to Topkins Ave and Spruce Street. I guess it's Ryan. Was there any action item you had note of from last meeting?
Yeah, let me look. What number is that again? Sorry, don't have both screens up.
No, all good. Number 6. Might actually be number 5. Sorry.
The only note I have is more
6.
research on signal at Hawthorne. That's it? The Hawthorne?
No, it was Topkins Ave and Spruce.
Yeah, so I had a different number 6 on the last
I
agenda.
have some information about that.
Oh, nice. Go on, Rob.
So they wanted a crosswalk. I went there this morning. And I'm going to read from the minutes because I think this goes back to December. Dan will follow up with DPW for a crosswalk across Spruce. All members agreed that a crosswalk was needed. Crosswalk currently there, but it is faded. Dan will follow up.
Yeah.
Kelly said we should wait for Dan to follow up before notifying the resident.
Yeah,
Yeah, there is a crosswalk, but it's faded. It needs to be redone.
yeah.
Maybe-
As some of you may know, I had a unanticipated stay in the hospital after the,
I'm not
yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm not
Don't worry.
criticizing you. I'm just saying what we had discussed in December.
yeah, I think that's the same thing with the nursery school and the Northbury Avenue. I've been catching up for the better part of between that and working from home. It's been a trying last 6 weeks.
Yeah, Dan, no worries at all. Rob, thanks for walking the area and bringing that up. And thank you, Ryan, for having notes, because a lot of these like, hey, let's like touch base on what we were supposed to do. And if we didn't do it, then let's just follow through. So no worries on that. Okay, so Dan, if you could, whenever you have a chance, we'll follow up with DPW as there's consensus on the crosswalk. And you mentioned, what were the follow-ups for the nursery school in North Barry?
That was, yeah, Northbury was the request for the always stop at Northbury and I think it was Brook, which
They're separate issues, Brian. The nursery school is on Tompkins. There are a number of recommendations, and North Barry and Brook is a separate location.
Okay,
Which do you want to talk about?
let's start with the nursery school.
I think if everyone looks, if you have a copy of the minutes from December, there are quite a number of comments from the people who are run the school and suggestions. The chief of police made some recommendations. Dan made some recommendations. It's all covered in the
In the
December
notes,
minutes.
yeah. Yeah, I have it up now. So one of the takeaways, Dan, was for the addition of that hatch pattern. I remember we talked at length about, again, another stop sign situation here. There were no history of the accidents, and we were supposed to reach out to the traffic engineer about the hash mark pattern and whether we could do it in that area.
Yeah.
Likewise, I don't know if this would be for the traffic consultant. I'd be curious for your take, Dan, with the chief's recommendations with using the yellow colored signs, just better visibility on this existing signs. Could be worth a thought.
Yeah, and I mean, the equipment and what we can do with signs nowadays, it's, much different than, when I first started. They have the retroreflective signs, you can do the high visibility colors. I can, maybe flesh out some specific recommendations with the chief and Public Works.
Okay. Do you want me to re-engage the chief on this, or do we have enough information from Rob's minutes?
I'll take a look and follow up.
Okay.
I mean, I prefer to follow up with the chief or Lieutenant Gannon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dan. And then we have Taylor's Lane and Post Road. So this was an interesting one. This was, yeah. This, we did not have a clear action item coming out of it. This was where, Dan, if you remember the turn, we were talking about like the need to cut back some of the bushes on Post Road.
Okay.
Down like, I believe it's like the south side of the street. If you bring it up on Google Maps, I think it'll kind of jog our memories.
Yep, give me 1 second.
And this was where, and I've walked this area before too, just when the weather was nicer, is that on one side of Taylor's Lane, it's really difficult to not only see as a motorist, but there's nowhere to walk or stand for pedestrians. And there was discussion about it at the gas station, some blockage.
Okay, so there's there's Greenhaven. That's the TD Bank there. This is Mangone's. And then the Toyota dealership. And the gas station. And here's Taylor's Lane.
Yeah, there's no sidewalk, nor is there really anywhere for kids to safely walk. Or anyone to safely walk for that matter. Hey, go on, Rob.
Well, I mean,
If
ahead,
I
Dan.
remember correctly, also, weren't they talking about possibly having the gas station close the entrance from Taylor's Lane? Didn't that come up? on
That's
one of
all
our
in the
meetings?
minutes. It's all in the
Yeah,
December
that was
minutes.
brought up.
Yeah.
I'd like to add something because this was brought up last year as well. And the prime concern last year was speeding down Taylor's Lane, up and down Taylor's Lane, far back down Taylor's Lane. So it had less to do with the gas station, had less to do with the bushes. It was concerned about speeding down Taylor's Lane and kids walking to and from school on Taylor's Lane. That was the main concern.
So
And let me just finish this. And the chief put a traffic monitor there and found that there was no speeding, and apparently there was no record of accidents over the last 5 years. But there definitely is speeding, cars going faster than they should.
So, I mean, there's no sidewalk over here, but this is a very large grass right of way between the road and our fenced off area of Taylor's Lane. So I mean, this has got to be good, what, 8 to 10 feet of a grass area to walk on. Yeah, I think there was concern about speeding also on Shadow, maybe. I think we had, I can't recall, with the speed wagon on both Shadow and Taylor's.
But as you go up Taylor, there's less room to walk because of the additional foliage. And Dan, you spoke last time about cutting back the foliage
Yeah, I mean, I'll,
right there.
yeah, you gotta make sure it's what's ours. I mean, you really don't have there's a stone wall here and then maybe about a 3 to 4 foot of everything, but I think
It gets worse as you get to Post Road.
Right.
I mean, it's not really a suitable walking area to begin with. It's somewhat narrow on, there's a little bit of a slope here. I don't know to what extent people are walking down this side when it's more safe to walk on this side.
Remember, it's not people, it's the kids that are doing walking.
I mean, kids are people too.
Yeah, they are.
You can't park on a sidewalk, so that's. I'll we can certainly ask Public Works to take a look at this when they have ability and time to cut back shrubbery.
Do you think it would make sense to have the resident dial in and just ask, be like, because this is a tricky situation, undoubtedly. Perhaps just ask for their input, be like, hey, we're looking at this and obviously we want what's right for the kids and safety, but what do you have in mind as far as alleviating this situation?
Why don't we make it a requirement that if somebody puts in a issue or a complaint, that they participate and attend the meeting for just that purpose?
It's a good thought. I mean, I think, yeah, I wouldn't want to box them to let's just say one occurrence, but I think for an item to be considered, I think it's something we could definitely consider, Rob. Dan, if you could on the follow up with DPW as far as potentially trimming back or seeing what's needed there.
Yeah.
I will find who the resident is and reach out and ask them to attend and voice their concerns and give us a little bit more color. And I think otherwise we'll just leave it on the docket, but knowing that there's, at least at this exact moment, there's not a ton that we can do.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. The nursery school, Dan, you mentioned you would own the follow-up on that. That's just waiting.
Yeah, actually, it's.
Yeah. And then the last item is the North Barry and Brook. This was something that we discussed at length, and Dan, you brought up the point that, we had a couple folks from the street on the line, and they seemed to indicate that everyone was in favor of this, but you've seen those types of situations go awry where that's not always the case. And
And I actually, the gentleman who was kind of leading the charge, he reached out to me. I let him know that I was somewhat infirmed and didn't have a chance to follow up, and I think he was fine with that. So I'll follow up on that item.
okay. All right, Dan, thanks for all the work. Sorry to pile on. So that covers all the new and old business. Was there anything else that folks wanted to discuss?
I do.
Hmm?
Does anybody else want to speak? I'm not trying to monopolize the conversation, but I have a couple of things I want to talk about.
No, go for it.
What about training? When is Shannon Purdy going to get involved with us? And what about training for the rest of us? What's the plan for that?
It's a good question, Rob. Dan, do you want to sync up on that, you and I,
Yeah, I
and
think,
come up with like a plan, like either something formal or something that folks can dial into, or in person, whichever route we go. That's top of mind for myself as well, Rob.
Yeah,
We'll find time with her.
You do that. So,
And again, what about Shannon Purdy? Is she going to contact us individually, or I thought she was going to attend one of our meetings? Can somebody look into that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, good points, Rob. Was there anything else or just those two?
Perhaps we might consider having a separate meeting, not to discuss specific traffic issues, but just how we're going to conduct our meetings, how we're going to handle, timeframes for issues, what kind of information we want from applicants. Just kind of a general organization meeting, if that's something that we can do. Find time for that.
Okay, that's something I can own and I'll set up. And I'll try to get it set up before the next meeting with some ideas on, because I think you have some good points with respect to encouraging folks to attend and perhaps making it a prerequisite that folks attend the meeting when they raise a concern, as well as structure. I think this meeting, we had some good structure, and I appreciate everyone chipping in, and Rob and Ryan specifically for the notes we're able to cite upon. And obviously Gary, Mike, and Dan, and Blue, and Mark, everyone's input. I think we were able to hear out the community quickly and give them all a voice, which I think is really important. And I think next meeting we can be even better, but I'll set that up, Rob.
So how will we go about setting up that meeting, Brian? Would it be a Zoom meeting between just us? I know there was some thought about not having any meetings that are not public record. Are we gonna have just a phone call, a big, audio text chat or something? I know, Dan, you responded to that last time.
Yeah, so just some advice. If you're discussing public business, and I would say the format of your meetings is public business, that would have to be held in public session if there's a quorum to review this. You could maybe a suggestion is if someone prepares something as like a document for people to respond to individually. If you're gonna have any discussion as a group about the operation of your meetings, I would say that is public business and would need to be held in a public session. Not that I'm not an attorney, but that's just my experience.
I don't understand.
That
So
would
when
seem
when
wise.
would we, what? Sorry.
I was saying that would seem wise. What Dan just said. You shouldn't all meet if it's not on the record.
Well, how would we go about doing that now? Say we want to meet in 2 weeks, Dan. What do we do?
I would maybe just have the chair email Sally Roberts, who's the deputy village clerk, and she can take care of the logistics of setting up the meeting.
I have one more issue. So Ryan agreed to do the minutes for January. And I don't know if you all know, but that the recording was sent to Ryan and to myself because I was doing part of it. And unfortunately, the recording was not the complete meeting. The meeting lasted about 2 hours. The recording lasted about 20 minutes. So I notified Sally and Augie, I guess, and requested that they send us the complete recording for January so that Ryan can complete the minutes. Can Lou and Dan look into that to see what's happened with that recording? Because we can't complete the minutes without the recording.
Did no one take notes?
For this meeting, Lou?
Yeah, I took
Oh.
notes, Lou, based on the fact that we had a recording of the session.
Oh,
So you know what I'm saying, it's something like along the lines of, I made some very general comments, which I think is likely enough to build the minutes of the meeting. But
I think so. Yeah, I think they're mostly action minutes and recollection, and you show them to everybody. And if the other commissioners have a different recollection, then you correct the minutes. That's why you vote on them. I think I don't think we need to make it complicated. What do
I
you
disagree.
think, Dan?
Well, the tech, from what you're absolutely required to do in a minutes, and the minimum that you have to do is
Yeah.
you have to have a record of motions and votes.
Yes.
On the various minutes do not need to have anything more than that legally. But the style and substance of your minutes, I think that tends to be more of a personal choice among the board members of what you like to see with them. But in terms of what's absolutely required is just a recording of the motions and votes.
So
ahead,
I
Mike.
think
Go
this
ahead,
is
Michael.
between I think this is between the commissioners and their chairman, and you can do the minutes however you want. We'll check to see if there's a recording. If there's not, do the best you can with the January minutes from the notes you have and everybody's recollection.
My wife was took the minutes on the tree committee, and she's a journalist, and she had a tough time to do it. I've been a secretary on other boards, and it's a tricky thing to do. I mean, it's a real skill to take the notes and participate at the same time. And it's hard to do. And some people are better than others, and we're going to rotate. We're going to have our same style. And it's a learning curve. I mean, I don't think anybody wants to volunteer to do the minutes, but it is a skill. You're supposed to go by Robert's rules. It's not that easy. So the video is a good backup.
Yeah,
Otherwise, you're taking the minutes. It's really hard to focus and participate at the meeting, get the general sense of it because you're busy writing. So that's just my take on it. So we need that video. I mean, if it's being recorded, I'm not sure why it's not being recorded properly.
Agreed. Well, we'll check and see. But I was broadcasting for 43 years, and I know technical glitches are constant. So we'll check and see if it's there. If we can get it to you, great. If not, we'll have to live without it. I'll check with Sally tomorrow.
I'd like to make a comment about the minutes themselves. I agree, Robert's rules has certain requirements in terms of minutes. But to me, the value of the minutes comes up at subsequent meetings because you have a record of things that were discussed and rejected, proposals. And I'm getting the sense that the minutes that I did for December were rather detailed. And I'm a little disappointed that they weren't really referred to as we discussed these things. The purpose of having detailed minutes about these different locations and issues is that people forget from month to month. And there's a record going forward to remind everyone. And I'm hoping that our minutes will be more detailed and will provide a source of information, a positive source of information for subsequent meetings. That's, to me, that's the purpose and the value of the minutes that we keep.
Okay, well, I will leave that to you gentlemen to deliberate on, and
That's something for us to discuss as a group, how
yes,
we want to do that.
absolutely.
And we should do that.
Absolutely.
And-
Yes, but you wanna move on with your business too. All right, great. I'll check on that, Robert. I'll check on the recording and let you know if we have it. And Ryan, you needed that also?
Yes, sir. I'm responsible for producing the minutes for the last meeting. So if that would
Lucky
be
you.
helpful. If not, I'll go with what I have in my notebook.
Sure. Okay. All right. I'll check on it, and do I have your contact information, sir?
Yeah, I have my email address, which is the rbuck at vomny.net.
Got it.
And
We'll take care of that.
Yeah, I have no problem. My number is publicly available on the World Wide Web. So you can reach me at 917-582-2668. 917-582-2668. It's the same number I've had for 20 years and I've given to thousands of students. So it's okay. My
Okay.
mom calls me on the same number. You can too, Lou.
Okay. All right. All right, guys.
Have a nice night.
Thank you, Lou. So,
Chairman, I think you got to close the meeting, Chairman.
yeah. So motion to close the meeting, and thanks everyone. And Rob, we appreciated your detailed notes and we use them for the action items. I think we just like I was taking notes, and the recording will help, but like, we're volunteers. We're going to do the best that we can. And like, no one's going to get smacked for not having perfect minutes. So, when my minutes don't compare to your minutes, or Ryan's minutes don't compare to your minutes, and vice versa, it's not a big deal, but I agree.
I think Ryan feels the pressure now.
He was getting it, like Ryan.
I mean, take a look at Robert's notes. You got a lot to live up to.
Yeah.
They were
I may have
great. They were
overdone
great
it.
minutes, Robert. I read through
Yeah.
them. They're really detailed and good, and we'll be referring back to them, I'm sure.
All right, motion to close, guys.
Second the motion.
All right. I confirm, or I approve, so we're good to go.
Just ask all in favor.
All in
You
favor.
got to vote.
Aye.
Bye.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Good night,
Have a good
guys.
night.
Bye-bye.